Hi, this is David Licata. I'm the director of A Life's Work, and I'm here with the cinematographers, Wolfgang Held and Andy Bowley. Hey, Wolfgang.
All right, let me see if this works. And here I am. Oh my God, look at this. Wow, that shot, it's holding up. It's beautiful colors. Huh? So did we shoot this on SD?
Yep.
So it's the Panasonic 100X or whatever it's called.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and with the little tapes.
I always liked that camera, that old camera, because it's very painterly, the colors.
Exactly. It's got a nice sort of pastel look to it.
Almost looks like 16 millimeter or Super 8 or something. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the shots of the meeting. I remember like Paolo shooing you away. I was like cowering and trying to get you to come, but like a good DP, you were like, nope, I'm going to keep shooting it. I don't care what he says. One of the things I was curious about is, you're like basically like plopped down into this environment, this like beautiful Arizona landscape with this architecture. And it's like, what are you seeing? Like, are you like thinking about like, oh, that would be an interesting establishing shot? Are you thinking about, we'll look at those colors? Are you?
I think when I first landed that, I was always thinking of how do we give this project scale? Because it's architecture and there's so many intricate details and beautiful sort of organically grown architecture, but it also plays in the landscape. And so I wanted to really think about the scale from how it sits in the landscape and then how the details, once you're in it, are different to seeing how it plays in the landscape. Because that's the way my brain works to understand a place visually. I always shoot through the viewfinder. I never use the little built-in screen. So I shut myself out from the world, and I just see the movie in the viewfinder. And that's when I get hyper focused and hyper concentrated on the image. And in my mind, those images in the darkened viewfinder become what I know of the world around me, and it helps me structure it. Because when you're in the world, you look in all directions, and everything has interest for different reasons. And then to find like a focus, like in the black screen. So my mind always works that I want to start with a wider shot to understand the world from far away. And I do that in every film. It's just the way when I shoot cinema verite, I always watch people through the window. Even if I miss like people crying, I also want to see them outside first, understand what they're doing, understand where they are in the world, and then I jump in. And I'm never nervous about missing things because it's just the way my brain works. So once I understand where it situates in the world, then I feel much more comfortable going in around it and understanding the intricacy. And I also find like when you have these wide shots, right, that you do in a film, when you do the close-ups later on, this works in fiction films as well. You always spend so much time setting up this big wide shots with all the actors, and you spend like hours doing it. And then you have like very little time to shoot all the close-ups where all the juicy bits happen. And when the film is cut, it's like 95% of all the close-ups, and there might be one or two times you see the wide shot. Right. But when you see the close-ups, your mind connects them to the wide shot that you've seen or will see, because I think then you understand where they are in the world, and it informs the mood and what you do. And I think that's so the way my brain works too. It's almost like I wanted, because I'm looking through the viewfinder, I see this like a movie that I understand. So I wanted to understand, like when I go into the details, I see the blue sky and the valleys and the colors of this space and the dirt road around it when I shoot the close-ups of the bells and the amazing architecture inside. Right?
Wow. So you don't even use it like on a narrative feature, like a monitor?
No, because I operate myself. I mean, I have a monitor for lighting and more correct colors, and I go back and forth. But then when the shot's happening, I'm always behind the camera looking through the viewfinder. I don't think I went out to the city. That's beautiful. Yeah, that's a gorgeous shot. I forgot about that. It's really nice. Yeah.
You and the other cinematographer, you both shot 3 people. And that was part of the challenge with him because he came out after you. And so it was kind of like, I appreciate that he has his own style or whatever, but kind of has to match, right?
Right. But you also have a clear idea of what you wanted.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi, my name is Andy Bowley, and I'm one of the cinematographers on the film.
So when you saw the other footage, did you think like, oh, I have to sort of continue a certain style, or were you like, what was your sense of carrying on shooting the film?
Yeah, I hate to use the word organic, but I just remember very vividly. It was another character he started with, but it was kind of approaching. It might have been the Mill Arch through a snowstorm.
Yeah.
And he had made the choice to shoot through the windshield, in a snowstorm, approaching a scene. I thought that is such a great choice, and I guess he's making choices that kind of allows the audience to see around the edges, like how things are happening, how we're approaching characters, how we're getting there, how things are created. It's not it's an informal style where you're allowing the audience to kind of see how it's put together to some degree. And I thought those are great choices. So that's stuff I was thinking about. Definitely, I wasn't trying to be too formal,
right?
And trying to gather a lot of stuff on the edges that seemed to kind of continue with how Wolfgang started.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, it seemed to me, exactly like you said. It was like, I think both of you had similar aesthetics. I mean, he was very much like, he just wanted to use natural light whenever he could. I mean, all those, like the Soleri interview outside was all about that. I mean, it was like we just found this background. It was a beautiful day. All he threw down was like one of those sort of like reflective blanket kind of things, just to give a little light underneath. And you're very much the same way.
Yeah. Well, like I say, I felt like I had some big shoes to fill, but I'm a big fan.
This was our Chicago
Yeah,
stint.
the bubble. Yeah, to try to hide the camera somewhere in the shadows. It sees everything.
Yeah. This was a lot of fun. I liked actually working in the record store. It was great fun.
Yeah.
This guy, he's totally out of high fidelity. I mean, like central casting, the expression he has when he talks about like hearing something really special is just priceless.
Here's the record they put together and put out. Sometimes it's more kind of hymnal stuff, but sometimes not. Sometimes
we never know. I'd rather have it not. So before...
I'm always amazed when they agree to do stuff, like, can you walk into that store again? And they're like, sure. I'm like, well, thanks.
Right. But these guys are also so into what they're doing that each time they're doing it, they're doing something for real, which is wonderful. You set them up to look at the tree, but they're really like, they're doing what they always do. They check out, wow, how old is this tree? Or
I mean, I think that's definitely true. It's like people, they just love, they love talking about this work that they're really passionate about. They love being around it and helping tell a story about it. Okay, so here's Soleri. So a lot of stock footage. Stock footage.
Of course.
Yeah. A lot of, because, part of the idea was to
get the scope of his work.
Right. Yeah. And the years, really see him age. That was a big part of it for me. And I felt like, stock was the way to go.
Oh God, Dick Cavett stuff is just so great.
I know, right? Isn't it awesome?
That
was a real stroke of luck that you ran into that guy, because man alive.
Did that come about because of that guy I met on the street?
Yes, at the bookstore. Exactly.
Wow.
Right? I know. It just blows my mind that kind of stuff happens.
I was on the street on the Upper West Side in New York, and there was a guy there on the sidewalk with a bunch of books on a couple of tables. And it was kind of like, every week you'd see the guy there just selling his books if the weather was good. And he happened to have this huge kind of folio, this big book about Paolo Soleri. It was really beautiful. And so I picked it up, and we got to talking. And it turned out that he was actually a producer that worked with Dick Cavett for many, many years. And he sort of let me know that that he, I guess, was part of his show at one point. So it's kind of amazing.
It is. It's remarkable. I mean, you gave me his card or something, the producer, and I got in touch with him and gave me a rate. And it was more expensive than the other archival I had to get, but it was so worth it just to have that little bit of footage, because that really shows like, oh, he was on this national TV program, but that he was, very prominent. He was like a big deal.
Yeah. This is some of the first footage I ever saw. And I thought Wolfgang did such a beautiful job This is in the early days. I think it might have still been mini DV. I'm not sure.
It is. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I mean, just these images are just beautiful. I just love it. So my hat's off.
I really loved this background. It wasn't like you had, great depth of field to work with or anything, but it was still so beautiful looking. Like he blends into like his shirt is like the same color as the background. And ordinarily that would be like, oh, that's bad. But in this case, it's like, oh, that's good. It's like he's part of the work, it's like he's like practically protruding from his work.
Also, I love soft light, there was indirect light, there was bounce from the floor, he was in the shadow. To me, this is so much nicer than all these interviews I do right now. It's beautiful daylight. It's exactly what I love doing, rather than making this whole song and dance. But I don't like using lights anymore. The older I get, the less I use. And this is an early example of just looking what the sun's doing and putting people in the right place and just going with it. I do that a lot with windows now, turning lights off and don't even set up any movie lights anymore. And when it works, I still think it's so much more natural, beautiful, powerful.
These are so much closer to the ground. And the wind speed, there's a gradient from the ground where it has to be 0 to going up. And so the higher you got in the air, the higher the wind was, and 6 meters survived.
Today, a new moon is in the sky, a 23-inch metal sphere placed in orbit by a Russian rocket. You are hearing the actual signals transmitted by the Earth-circling satellite, one of the great scientific feats of the age.
Beep, beep, beep as it went over. Well, Sputnik changed a lot of things.
So just a question for you, David, as we look at the Paolo Soleri stuff, and he's talking about going to school in Torino, you have your background, some of your background's in Northern Italy. Did you kind of try to make an Italian connection with him?
Yeah, I did. It was funny because he had, he sounded a lot like my mother, like his accent. And when it came time, I had to make this decision about whether to subtitle him or not. I totally understood everything he was saying. I didn't have a problem, but like everybody was like, you got to subtitle. I can't understand the combination of his sort of like gravelly, voice of an elder person plus the accent made it difficult for a lot of people to understand. So I really didn't want to do it, but then I recognized, yes, I did have to do it. Yeah. But in terms of, I think actually you mentioned when we interviewed him, you mentioned that my mother was from Trieste, and he was like, oh,
So I was the one.
That was about it, and he was like, oh, I mentioned he's from Turin. He's like, oh. It's like, we're not really Italian. I think he mentions something about my mother not really being Italian. It's like, which is a common joke because it was, it was like it used to be part of Austria and blonde, and so they're more Germanic in a way than Italian, So it's, and I think he felt that way. And I think
there's a whole thing that goes on in Italy. Yeah.
In that northern part. So I did try, and he was a curious guy. He was generous in some ways, and then he was very guarded. He was didn't talk too much about himself. I mean, getting the stuff about like his going to school and all that. That was, I think the last time we interviewed him. It was like I'd already spoken to him 3 or 4 times, and I hadn't gotten anything about his background. It wasn't coming up. So I finally had to pull it out of him. Like, tell me about like your childhood.
And I love that stuff. It's really important, I think. I know it's almost a cliche to say, hey, where were you born and how'd you grow up? But it really, it's always a great starting point, and it means a lot for an audience, I think, to have some kind of insight into, and it meant a lot in the film. Just that little bit about his background was so important.
Yeah. And, I was kind of amazed when he said it was, didn't really think much about, like he could do a couple of different things. He could go into fine arts, or he could like study philosophy, or he could do architecture. And he kind of shrugs and like, he says, I chose architecture. I don't know why. He was like no original passion or will like, you know, drive to study it. Whereas the rest of the people are like, oh, like the Millarks, right? It's like, oh yeah, my grandfather did it, my great grandfather did it. It's sort of like in their blood. And Robert and Jill were both very much like, oh yeah, I was like 7 or 8, and it's moved me so much, and so on. And he was just sort of like, I fell into it, you know, which is great because it sort of shows you it doesn't all have to happen when you're 7 or 8 years old.
Yeah, I sort of wonder if his teacher, if Frank Lloyd Wright, would ever say such a thing like, "Oh, I just fell into it." I don't think so.
Yeah, I imagine not. I could definitely not hear him saying that. It's like divine force came down upon him and decided he had to do it.
Yeah.
When you go to a place that you hadn't been to before, you hadn't been to Arco Santi, right? What are the first things you see? What do you try to make yourself aware of that maybe, you know, you might not be aware of as a tourist somewhere?
Well, as a filmmaker, when I step into a place, I pay a lot of attention to what strikes me and what I'm curious about. As soon as I set foot on a piece of land or whatever, you know, a great example is I just saw the opening shot to the film, and I see this beautiful structure, and I think, oh, like, I think the audience would love to just explore the details of that structure or be curious about how it's made. So I kind of allow the audience to kind of work through me a little bit and sort of think, okay, well, what would somebody be curious about if they were me right now, just looking at the place? That goes end to end, no matter who we're talking to, what I'm doing, what I'm shooting, whether it's a detail or anything, you know, much wider. That's always the thing, is what would the audience like to see? What would they be curious about right now? And I suppose you could say it's a lot more fun that way, because it's not very cerebral, really. I'm also satisfying my own curiosity, you know?
Right. Are you focusing on the monitor? Are you looking through the eyepiece, or is it a combination?
I think, you know, it's changed a little bit over the years, but well, there's a practical thing. You know, if you're shooting in bright sunlight, sometimes you really have to look through a monitor. You want to have this feeling of being in a dark room and just seeing a little glowing rectangle and seeing your image without any distortion or reflection. But I really, really love taking the camera away from my natural eye level and putting it on the ground. I love to do that. So that requires kind of looking at a monitor. So it's sort of a combination, I suppose. But really, to get the camera where it needs to be, at the height it needs to be, in the place it needs to be, a lot of times I do have to rely on that, just looking at that little monitor.
Right. I remember you at SETI putting it on the ground quite a bit.
It's great to be on the ground. It's great because if you're walking around, this is a little bit of a 101 for people who are interested in camera work. I don't have to use a tripod, so I can walk around. I can work really fast, and you know the clock is ticking. If you're working on a documentary, you don't have a long schedule, so you really want to gather your material quickly, and to not have a tripod and be able to stabilize the camera on the ground allows you to work really fast. And I also think it's really beautiful and arresting in a lot of ways, because how often can you actually get that low to the ground and see in that perspective? It's very, very unusual. And in a lot of cases, it's very, very arresting to see plants from down low, to see like a visual that's dominated by the sky, or it can really do a lot for an audience to kind of get their attention. So I just love doing that.
Yeah, and it's really great because you know, I mean, it's like an obvious thing, right? But it's, you know, presenting something that a person might see every day from a new angle, from a new perspective, right? Literally. So just makes you like, you know, wow, I never looked at it like that before, you know, which is kind of the bigger picture of what documentaries are supposed to be doing overall.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, this is the house, the dome house.
And we had so little time, I remember, like he was only there.
I felt like that was a little rushed.
It was. I got lost. He was there. We were really rushed. It was really...
I remember I wasn't so happy with the shoot because it was such a gorgeous space and we just didn't have quite time to capture it. And there was so many other people there. To get focused on the scene was hard. Yeah. We got some beautiful footage. Yeah.
We did, yeah.
I just love his hands, the way he uses his hands. Great to see his body language. Look at that. It's like music to him, making these. It's like playing a piano.
For me, these shoots were difficult just because they just were. They were also freezing. I remember being at one place outside and it was like unbearable cold. And at even one point we were shooting and your hands were starting to like lose feeling.
It was very cold that year.
Yeah, it was just brutal. So,
but snow looks beautiful, on camera.
Yeah.
And these guys, the scale of the tree farm that they're building, it's great to get that.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Size of it.
Very graphic, very gorgeous. Yeah, look at those rows and rows and diagonals. It's really nice.
I always love birds. I always look for an opportunity to get a bird in a film. It's kind of like, it's like has a little more mood to it, the way he's sitting with it. It's more relaxed the way he's for the dog. It doesn't feel like set up like an interview. And I always try to watch that when people sit down to figure out where do they sit normally, rather than tell them sit here. It doesn't always work, but when it works, I love it. Like the shot by the fireplace. I really like. That's beautiful colors. It looks almost like film. It's the same camera, right?
Yeah.
I didn't shoot this. But
no, I shot this actually. This is like, yes, I did this.
Well, you did a gorgeous job, man. It's just really sensational.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so this is what you're talking about. Yeah, that's beautiful. With the fire, that's gorgeous. Yeah.
And at the time, the cameras weren't soft, so you have to really work for soft light. So it's actually real daylight that's on his face. And if he's a little further from the window, he looks so soft and not lit. I love that stuff. And just look at those shots. It looks like film to me. The colors are just sensational.
These are the first shots actually that you shot. These were the very first ones.
Yeah.
Like, the morning we got there.
Oh my God.
It's the first day we were there. Look at that light, right? I mean, it's amazing. Mm-hmm. You work with a lot of, very big, famous, folks. What's it like? I mean, it must be like going to a master's class or something every time you go through your job.
Yeah. I think it's the best part of the job, actually. It's the reason I do what I do. I enjoy this exposure to these kinds of people, these kinds of places, and also to other filmmakers, obviously. But wow, I mean, just to meet these kinds of people, for me, is really fascinating. And I really, I'm not usually the interviewer with this stuff, but very often I have to spend a little bit of time. Maybe I'm just putting a microphone on or I'm just adjusting a light. Mm-hmm. But I almost always, especially if I'm putting a microphone on somebody, I always start talking to them. And I never ask them questions about whatever their line of expertise is. Like, I don't know, we did an interview last week with Reba McEntire, and I was putting a microphone on her, just adjusting something. She just sat in the chair. And I think I asked her about her horse. I said, are you still riding? And what's your horse's name? And I was just sort of naturally curious about all that stuff. So, we didn't talk about music at all. It was all about, the personality of horses, that kind of stuff. So, by the time she sat down, she knew that, I don't know, we just had a little conversation. It just felt a lot more comfortable,
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. I mean, that must, and it's not like a conscious thing, that you're doing to make these people feel comfortable. That's just your nature, to engage somebody and talk about whatever's going on that you happen to know about. And it makes, the interviewer's job so much easier.
Yeah.
They're loosened up, right? And you're like the comedian that goes on before the big comedian.
The warm-up guy.
The warm-up guy. You're getting everybody loose, which is invaluable, because I can't imagine working with somebody who made the person really uptight. I mean, what a to sit in that chair after that, you'd be like, holy crap.
Yeah, there's no reason.
Yeah.
And I also, because I work pretty intuitively, I'm not usually too, I'm usually very, very casual, really to a fault in a lot of ways. with everybody. But I think it's almost sort of disarming. You're almost kind of surprised by it. And once you're there, you're there. You're in a casual environment. Everybody feels comfortable. That's all it is.
Right. Does that have to do with like the size of the crew? Because I know usually you work with a small crew, right?
I think that definitely brings about a much more sort of comfortable feeling if you don't have 30 people in the room, for sure. It just feels like a family affair, you know?
Right.
Definitely.
Right.
Yeah, keeping it small is good.
Yeah.
You know, even Stanley Kubrick, you know, kept his crews extremely small. Like a lot of really big directors are very, very strict about keeping, you know, the number of people down when they can. And I think it's really smart.
I didn't know that about Kubrick. That's interesting.
I know you did a little bit of shooting there, David. I remember some of your shots from the film.
I did a little bit, yeah. I did. I'm very proud of those few minutes. My approach is just like shoot the bejesus out of it, you know? Like just let the camera run and there will be a few seconds that I can use. So it's kind of, that was what I did. I had no idea how to shoot the redwoods. I mean, it's just like, how the hell do you shoot these monstrous trees? It's just, you know.
This idea of, you know, you're talking to somebody, it's a classic thing. You're talking to somebody and they maybe have something in their hand that they're showing you. And there's a time when you want to show the audience what's going on, what's in the hand, but you don't want to miss that moment, maybe some expression in their face. So it's always hard to know exactly when to pan away to do that.
Yeah, hard for an editor too, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's tricky. Yeah, you're right. It's a tough decision. Related to that, it was like I had this horrible idea early on where I didn't want to have talking heads at all. I envisioned that they were just being voiceover. And Wolfgang thankfully talked me out of it, you know, and I'm so glad. I mean, I was very much inspired by that film, For All Mankind, the astronauts, so the minor film, right, where there's no, and you can't tell who's speaking, you know, you don't know, there's no like lower third identifying the speaker or anything like that.
Yeah.
In this case, anyway, I'm glad he talked me out of that because these people have such great faces, you know, and they are expressive, you know, they really, the thought of not having, like there's the shot with Jill that you shot where she's thinking, you know, she's got her head down and her, like a hand is on her chin, and it's just, and she raises her head and starts, you know, talking like that. I mean, to miss that expression would have been ridiculous. The parachute. You were completely obsessed with the parachute. It's beautiful. It just goes on and on and on. It's beautiful. Like single shot of you like zooming in and zooming out, you know. And I wondered, what did you find so captivating about it?
When I first saw it, I found it to be really just mesmerizing and beautiful. And sometimes it's very frustrating. You're hit with something in real life, and then you try to make something happen in the footage, and somehow the feeling isn't there, and it's kind of like, well, why am I not getting this? What am I missing? So I think I hit it from a lot of angles for that reason, because I didn't feel like I was really conveying the feeling I was getting to the audience potentially. But also I was blowing the shots. You know, a lot of times the timing wasn't quite right with the wind and everything. So I felt like it was just worthwhile. I was just sort of chasing it because I felt like I got a really strong feeling and I want the audience to feel it too.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, and it's just nature photography, right? You're like relying on the wind to do its thing.
Yeah.
Know? So here we are in Waco.
Oh, this is so much fun. You can see I'm starting to work with a slider. These are different cameras. You know, technology kind of marched its way through our film. We went from shooting with mini DV to shooting with a much bigger sensor. Some of the stuff was shot with a Canon 5D, and also some of the stuff was shot with a lettuce adapter, which is sort of like a large sensor that you put in front of a camera that has a smaller sensor. So the camera actually shoots the large sensor, and you get the feeling of a large sensor.
Ah,
So those were interesting times. It was a big leap. It was very exciting.
and that was one of the things I really actually came to embrace, was that idea that, yeah, this film's taking a long time and technology is changing. And when it came time for the climax of the film, then we went into everything was shot HD and we used the drone, so it became like this new day. And it really made sense for the theme of the film, the project marching on. It's just different people pushing it forward. So it's different technology telling the story.
Yeah, and it's great that you didn't get all nervous about it. Some people be like, well, I don't know if I can make a film that starts with mini DV and ends with HD, if I can project it. But you made it work. It's nice for audiences. So
yeah, it was nerve-wracking for me personally. I mean, I might not have shown it, but I was definitely really tense for a long time, because like when we first started shooting, I think HD had just come out, and it was just like so prohibitively expensive.
Yeah.
And everything involved, it was like meant buying, a new computer for more processing power for the bigger files and more hard drives and the camera. It was just like, I'll take my chances. And it worked out. I'm really happy with the upresing of the SD footage. I think it turned out really well.
Yeah, those are great cameras. I kind of missed shooting with them. They had actually the color in those early cameras, especially that Panasonic, was actually much better than the color in the early HD cameras that we had to use.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's a pipeline, and you have to sometimes sacrifice color data to make for that bigger image, and it really sometimes is very frustrating. Things are better again, but boy, the early days of HD were not fun for somebody who's sensitive to color. That's for sure. And this is all 5D. This macro setup is kind of interesting. It's sort of a nerdy thing, but I was using these East German Zeiss lenses that have like a Soviet mount on them. It's called a Pentagon 6. So, and I had macro rings on the back of those. So I'm shooting with macro with these very old lenses. It's pretty dirty, but I think it has a very nice look. It's not like super sharp, but there's something there that seemed to really kind of create the feeling that I like.
Yeah, it was perfect for those shots, no question. For the like the albums, the record spines and stuff like this stuff.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's perfect. I mean, they are these old battered things. They should.
It's using old battered lenses.
Yes, exactly right.
Beautiful, beautiful shot. I just love this.
Yeah.
The whole tableau with this sort of sickly tree and a man in the snow. It's very stark and beautiful. Yeah. Such a great way to draw an audience into the scene.
I love that you try to use long shots and give it time. You see how hard it is, and we just let the shot run and you're using it. Right. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I always felt that was a big part of the film, was the pacing. It had to be kind of, meditative.
It's interesting to think about. Sometimes we're forced to do things because of the environment, and we make these choices we don't normally make, but they end up being great choices. Like, I think conventionally, you might make the choice just to get a wide shot, right? And then maybe march in right next to him when he sees this tree. But staying back, and I think he probably stayed back because he didn't want to get any tracks in the snow. Or maybe it was just difficult to move with him. I don't know. But staying back was really a beautiful choice. It looks great.
Yeah. No, I agree.
It's lovely.
Yeah. No, I think those are really gorgeous shots.
We definitely had weather.
That was weather. Look at those waves. God. I mean, just freezing.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's so nice to see those textures. It holds up.
Right.
I love the texture of this old camera. It does look like a 16 millimeter, a hybrid between Super 8 and 16 millimeter camera to me, in terms of the colors and the slight soft graininess to it. It does have, it's off its time, but it's a beautiful off its time.
I should mention, this is thanks to the fine folks at Columbia University who,
Wow.
part of the people who archive Frank Lloyd Wright's stuff. And that was at MoMA, and they shot that gigantic model there.
Wow.
So thank you, Robert Branch at Columbia.
Oh, it's beautiful. I look at this film and I think, but I really, I just look at all these locations. I think, wow, what a great time I had. What a great time we had.
Yeah, no, it was. And it was, even at the time, I mean, I wasn't super freaked out, you know, like I might normally have been, you know. A lot of the times it was just very comfortable. A lot of that has to do with, you know, working with people like you who just sort of made it comfortable, you know. It was like I had absolute confidence that you guys were going to do, you know, better than I could even imagine, you know. Like, it turned out so much better looking than I could imagine. So I was just like, well, these guys are going to make it look great, you know. So I was comfortable. I was confident that you know, I was going to get great footage. So, you know, just sort of knowing that I had cinematographers of your caliber working on this thing was like, okay, well, that's encouraging. That's gonna, that keeps me going, you know.
Well, it's just a great idea that's not story-driven commercial. It's such an unusual film that way, you know, because it's really about an idea and a concept, and it's not clearly a topic-driven documentary
and that was always a little bit of a personal thing, because I felt like there isn't this complete narrative, you know. In fact, the story just keeps going, right? So it's kind of like there's no end to the story, and it's not this like hot topic issue like poisoned water or like true crime, you know. So it didn't have that kind of draw, right? But so I always felt that was a little bit of a knock, but I also felt that was the strong point, you know. So
right, but it has this beautiful different feeling. I mean, I think that it's attracted all of us. It attracted me to it. It's also a true independent vision, you know, which is so hard to find, you know, even today, or even more so today, where you know, there's a patience in the way you filmed this, you approached this, you scraped some money, you shot a shoot, and then you waited, you had another shoot. But also in the editing, it's very thought out in both what you shot and how you put it together, which really makes it unusual.
Thank you. I'm glad. Well, obviously, I'm very glad you participated. I wouldn't have pursued it if you hadn't showed any interest or excitement about it.
I'm just looking at these dishes that we shot that morning, and you know, all I remember is how much I enjoyed being in that high altitude in that morning. It was so beautiful and so quiet. And that's one of the reasons I love working with you is you know, you don't make a big splash. You kind of let things happen. And it was just, I just enjoyed it immensely. Just walking around with you and getting that footage. It was just a blast. Really fun.
I'm glad to hear that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, it was a gigantic learning experience for me, because I don't consider myself a cinematographer by any, you know, means, but just watching, you know, guys like you and Wolfgang like apply their trade was just like, wow, holy crap, and look at how it looks, you know. Afterwards I was like, that's why they did that. Oh, I get it. This is our drone. Your drone.
This is the first time I ever flew a drone for a film.
Isn't that great?
Oh, Jack looks great. I like the shot. And it was just such a delight to try it, you know?
I remember you were practicing like a little one in your living room, right?
That's right. I brought a teeny tiny drone and I flew it around my apartment for about 2 or 3 weeks just to figure out how to fly. It was awesome. A drone the size of a hand, basically. And I landed on chairs and try not to crash into lamps. Cool. And it was a lot of fun.
This Arcosanti section is the only HD stuff, but it made sense. It comes around, you know, starts with Arcosanti and we're shooting in that older format. And then here we are, it's the end of the film. We've come full circle and now we're in the same. technological push is, many years later, and here we are in HD.
I've got a question for you, David. We were there. I think that we gathered, if I have it right, that Salieri was buried not far away from Arcosanti, that there was some kind of a grave marker.
Right.
I sort of felt really strongly that at least we should get a shot of that or just gather it. But you didn't seem to have any interest, and you kind of were like, nah, you had a vision about that. And do you want to talk about how you wanted to treat his death in the film?
Oh,
that's... You want to reveal it or what you wanted to shoot?
That's interesting. Yeah, I remember that. And the fact that there was a marker. And yeah, it was very tricky. On the one hand, when he died, I was kind of like, it was very sad because, even though I wouldn't say we were friends, right? But you have, you do have these relationships with people, you become bound to them. And certainly editing him for 10 years, you definitely become attached and very familiar with people, and they become very important in your life. And so I just had this idea of the film just fading to black, and leave it up there, basically like a moment of silence.
Yeah,
visual silence, to sort of acknowledge this passing. And I think whenever I can go that route of just probably to a fault, being subtle like that,
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's almost like the choice to use footage of somebody when they start to cry during an interview. It has a lot of power. It can have a lot of power, but it can also, sometimes they say, if you show somebody crying, then the audience doesn't cry, because they do it for them. And it's a tricky choice.
Yeah,
it's like wielding a hammer when you don't need a hammer sometimes. So
right.
The place isn't really inhabited by ghosts, but it really is inhabited by Salieri's spirit. It's something all of us here at Arcosanti confront and live with on a daily basis.
But when I discovered that I had these two shots, it was like, oh, okay. And nobody ever notices it, There's just so much luck.
Wow, that's a great story.
And, you can't plan anything like that. I mean, shooting animals, it's freaking impossible. You never do what you wanted to do when you wanted to do it. So,
in the beginning of our discussion, you asked me about deciding what to shoot. I don't always do it first, but I'm always looking for a way of linking the audience to some kind of a natural environment, or it could be anything. It can be plants, it could be animals, it could be, but whatever's going on, I just love to show the idea that the natural world is just like churning away while we do our work, while we talk to who we talk to, whatever happens inside of a room, it's just this giant, engine going on outside. It's just continuing on. It's a way of showing scale, I guess.
Well, awesome. Yeah, I mean, exactly. And I think you knew that from the start I think the film was showing that sense of, time and scale, relationship.
Yeah.
There.
Was it easy to find an ending or no?
It was terrible to find an ending. I didn't have any idea how to end it, because it's like, how do you end a film where the people don't finish what they're doing, right? There is no natural ending. And when Salieri retired, I thought, okay, yeah, that's good. And I found out that Jeff was taking over. And so it was like, oh, great, I can use this. It's come full circle. Here's the new boss. It's, picking up the mantle. And then when he died, I was sad, but it was also kind of like, oh, what? This is really the meaning of the film. It's like, this is, it is about legacy. And so, beyond retirement, the bigger legacy is like, what do you leave when you leave the planet? And I felt like, okay, I was very confident with that ending, even though it did make me a little bit uncomfortable. I tried to, not be like, ka-ching, yes, he died. It's like, my ending. But Yeah, but it when that happened, there was no way I wasn't gonna incorporate that into the film, because I mean that's what it's really about. So yeah, it took a while. It took a long time before I figured out how to end it, and it was really the events that transpired. Nature took its course, and that made the ending happen.
Yeah, and you might say that the film took as long as it needed to take. I mean, if it hadn't taken that long, you would have had that ending.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. I certainly didn't see that at the time, and because it was just like a slog after a while. I was like, oh God, am I ever going to finish this? And people keep asking me when I'm going to finish it. And but yeah, and even though people were mentioning that, and I always thought they were just being kind of nice, when they would say, well, it makes sense. This isn't a film you should make in 2 years. This is a film that should take a long time. Show the passage of time. You want to show. So, but I came around, and I actually, yes, I do appreciate that, and I do believe that it definitely wouldn't be the same film if it hadn't taken as long as it had to do, and incorporate all those events and changes and ups and downs that folks had to experience, including us as filmmakers.
Well, I've said it before, but congratulations, David.
Thanks, Andy.
What a blast of creative energy.
Thank
to
you.
see that film again.
Oh, yeah.
It's gorgeous. It's really holding up. Thanks for showing that to me. That was really fun.
Thanks, Wolfgang.
Lord, I'm working on the building. Going on to heaven. Lord, get my reward. Lord, Lord. What is all over down here? All of my crying days is all over. I'm going on